Hey friend, please subscribe. 1 second for you. Big deal for me.
The handshake was firm, dry, and cold. Peter didn't look at me like a brother. He looked at me like I was a contractor who showed up late to bid on a job he already gave someone else. We were standing next to our father's casket, the wind scraping across the cemetery hill like it was trying to peel skin. October gray, no sun. The minister said the right things. Nobody cried loud, just coats zipped and eyes down. My name's Chase Thompson. I'm 34. I live outside Mineral Ridge, Ohio, where I run a small farm, vegetables, goats, bees when the season's right. And right now, I was trying not to punch my older brother in the face before the casket hit dirt. Peter was 38. He ran the business, Dad's jewelry group with shops across 3 states. He'd worn a navy overcoat, and an expression like this was a networking event. "Thanks for making the trip," he said like I wasn't family. "Let's talk tonight. There's logistics." That's how it started. Not even 6 hours after we laid Marshall Thompson in the ground. Quick note before we jump in. Drop a comment with the city or country you're listening from. It helps us see where everyone's tuning in and plan the best time for new stories. Thanks for watching Revenge by Frank. All right, let's get started. Back at the house, everyone sipped coffee and picked at the deli trays. Aunt Cynthia kept patting elbows. I stood by the kitchen window with a paper plate and watched the leaves slap against the porch rails. It was late afternoon when Peter caught me in the hall. Said, "Come to the study." No please, no explanation. Dad's study still smelled like his old cologne. Same leather chair, same clutter. Peter pulled out a folder and dropped it on the desk. Numbers, charts, quarterly balance sheets, like we were planning a merger, not burying blood. "No will," he said. "So technically it's intestate. But you're not planning to drag this into court, are you?" I stared at him. Dad had 2 sons. "So unless you've got something I don't know about, it splits even." Peter laughed once. "Chase, be real. You left when you were what? 18? I've been here. I built this. 12% would be generous. 18 if I'm feeling brotherly." I didn't smile. "I'm not begging." He stepped closer. "You run a goat farm and grow kale for farmers markets. This company needs a real captain." Cynthia walked in then, like she felt the temperature shift. "Peter, show some heart. Marshall would have wanted—" He cut her off with a tight smile. "You're being sentimental, Cynthia." I felt 14 again, watching him talk over her, talk over me. Peter leaned against the desk, folded his arms. "You chose dirt and goats. I chose legacy. Don't get mad now that the road forked." My jaw clenched. "I have a son. He's 6. He needs care." Peter's lip curled. "Not even blood, Chase. You made your choice. It's not fair to dock the company for it." I looked down at the rug. If I looked up, I was going to say something I couldn't take back. He tapped a card on the desk. "Nicole Watson, estate attorney. If you push this, we'll go to court. It'll be swift and clean." Swift and clean for him. For me, it would be vet visits, therapy runs, feeding before dawn, and court dates between. As I turned to leave, Cynthia caught my arm. Her voice dropped. "Your dad loved you just as much. He always softened when your name came up." That made it worse, because now it was too late. I drove 2 hours back to the farm in silence. The sun dipped behind the silo line. When I opened the door, the smell of damp soil and hay hit me like a blanket. I fed the chickens, fixed the gate latch, and rubbed down the dog. Out here, I knew what things meant. In that house, I was just a kid who walked away. I told myself I'd fight if I had to. But courtrooms weren't built for men with 6-year-olds and hay in their hair. I went to bed thinking about morning chores. That's how I handle hard things, one job at a time. The next morning, I was loading feed bags into the back of the truck when I saw her through the screen door, arms crossed, mouth tight, like she was chewing something sour and thinking it was me. I didn't even have to ask what was coming. Her boots weren't zipped, and she'd done her hair. That was her tell when she wanted to play power. "I heard there's no will," she said as I came up the steps. I wiped my hands on my jeans and nodded once. We'll split it fair, as the law says. She didn't blink. Fair doesn't buy a condo, Chase. Fair doesn't cover a down payment or a gym with daycare. You really gonna let your brother cut us out while you stand here shoveling manure like it's noble? I didn't take the bait. We'll fight if we need to, but nothing's settled yet. She let out this laugh, high, sharp, empty. You really don't get it. This place is a dead end. I'm tired of rubber boots and a truck that chokes every time it's under 30 degrees. You married me when I already lived here. She tossed her hair back like I'd said something dumb. Yeah, and I thought you'd grow up and come back to real life eventually. That one landed. I leaned against the doorframe, steadying myself on wood so I didn't start yelling. You mean give up the farm? I mean take whatever Peter throws and move somewhere that doesn't smell like manure. Start fresh. You think your dad wanted you scraping by out here with hand tools and guilt? That last part stuck under my ribs. He knew who I was. He just didn't write it down. Her arms dropped. You're stuck in this fantasy where pride feeds you. Wake up. If you really loved that kid, you'd give him a real shot. City schools, doctors who know what they're doing, not chickens and homemade soup. I stared at her. He's got routine here. He's got a coop he built himself, and a name for every hen. You think that doesn't count? She snorted. He's 6. He'll forget. No, I said. You will. She went still. For a second, I saw the part of her that used to smile when Wesley ran in with muddy shoes and stories about bugs. But it passed. He's your project, Chase, not mine. I'm done living small. She walked to the bedroom, grabbed the blue duffel from the closet, and stuffed it with shirts like they were insults. Makeup bag, charger, her coat. She didn't cry. She didn't even pause at the family picture on the shelf. Wesley on my shoulders, her arms around us like it meant something. At the door, she looked back once. You want a martyr badge? Wear it. But don't expect me to rot out here with you. The door slammed so hard the dog barked from under the porch. Wesley came around the corner in his socks, rubbing his eyes and holding that stuffed beagle he'd had since the first week we brought him home. Did Mama forget her work bag? He asked. I crouched down and picked him up. No, bud. She just needed to go somewhere for a while. Will she be back next week? I don't know. I tightened my hold. But we're okay. Sometimes folks get lost for a bit. We just keep going. The next morning, I drove Wesley into the city for his appointment with Dr. Lennox Vale. The waiting room had those fake leather chairs and muted blue walls that tried too hard to be calming. Wesley swung his legs, watching the fish tank. I filled out another stack of forms with the same info I gave last time. Vale came in 15 minutes late, eyes on the chart, not me. We're seeing some concerning patterns, he said, flipping pages like they were confetti. Markers that require more follow-up. I'm ordering a cardio panel and a neuroscan, just precautionary. He didn't make eye contact for more than a second, talked in circles. I asked what the scans were for exactly. He gave a speech about developmental flags and underlying complexity that didn't actually explain anything. Back in the truck, I looked at the appointment slip. 2 labs, both out of network. The kid was tired. He leaned on the door and drew a tractor on the window fog. I started keeping receipts in a Folgers can on top of the fridge. Co-pays, gas, parking. 11 visits in 9 weeks, not counting the ones he rescheduled for accuracy. I logged it all in a spiral notebook. I may not have a law degree, but I've raised animals long enough to know when a man's milking a cow. Meanwhile, calls started coming in. Private numbers, firm names I didn't recognize. Nicole Watson's assistant left a voicemail about probate positioning and strategic cooperation. I turned the phone face down and went to fix the fence behind the hoop house. That fence didn't lie. It just stood there needing work. That night, I made stew from the last of last year's venison and some canned tomatoes Gwen had helped me put up when she was still learning the jars. I sliced carrots thin so they'd cook fast, threw in bay leaves, and set the pot on low. Wesley sat at the kitchen table with his crayons, drawing the same tractor 3 times each one with bigger wheels. "Want to try the green one?" I asked, pointing to the crayon he'd left out. He didn't answer. He just leaned into my arm and stayed there. Didn't say much. Didn't need to. We ate in the quiet. The stew was decent. I let him have 2 pieces of cornbread because he smiled for the first time all day. That's how you measure progress sometimes. With crumbs. I slept light that night, half listening for coyotes and half waiting for headlights that never showed. Wesley tossed once but didn't call out. My brain kept circling court. Probate. Nicole. Peter with his lawyer and his cold smirk. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I wasn't going to fold. I wasn't going to raise this boy to watch me fold just because someone with a bigger office said I should. The morning after Wesley asked if his mom was coming back and I had nothing real to give him, I was hauling buckets to the goat pen when I saw her, standing by the porch rail like she'd grown there overnight, canvas tote on one shoulder, hair pulled back, and a tight-lipped smile like she wasn't sure whether to wave or run. "Are you hiring?" she asked before I could speak. "Cleaning, cooking. I can help with the boy, too. I'm good with kids. I've done this kind of work before." Her voice was steady, but I could tell she'd practiced the words more than once. I set the bucket down. "You got a name?" "Gwen," she said, hitching the tote higher. "Gwen Hale. I'm not trying to overstep. I heard through a neighbor down the road that you might be stretched thin." She didn't say which neighbor, and I didn't ask. I looked her over. Maybe 30. Hard to read eyes. Not dressed fancy, but neat. I didn't have money set aside for house help, but I was running out of hours and energy both. "I can't pay much," I said, "but there's a spare room over the mudroom if you don't mind creaky stairs and a space heater that clicks." Her face changed like I'd offered her a corner suite at the Hilton. "That'd be fine. I don't need much." By that evening, the kitchen smelled like cornbread and bacon grease, and the floors felt like they'd been scrubbed with care, not just water. She asked where I kept the mop, then made her own vinegar mix when I said I didn't have anything stronger than dish soap. She moved like someone who didn't flinch at mess. Quick, quiet, always working. She asked about the seed racks in the mudroom, why I stored coffee cans full of screws, and what kind of compost I used. Not small talk, real questions. When I talked about cover crops and pH balance, she nodded instead of zoning out. Wesley didn't even need warming up to her. By the second hour, he was dragging her to the coop to show her his favorite chicken, Red Boots. She knelt right down and said, "Which one's red? The one with the attitude or the one with the fluff butt?" He laughed so hard he nearly tipped into the hay. At dinner, she poured milk without asking, didn't fuss about salt, and laughed when I told her the honey label looked like a drunk raccoon stuck it on. It was the first easy laugh I'd heard in that kitchen in months. I didn't ask her where she came from or why she was available at short notice. Maybe I should have. But I had a boy to feed, a farm to run, and a court mess at the door. I wasn't in the market for stories, just steady hands. One night while washing up, I mentioned how my father never learned how to rest, even after he had the money to do it. Gwen dried her hands on a rag and said, "Some folks only know motion. Stillness scares them." I looked at her sideways, but didn't say the part that still stuck in my throat, that I spent half my life wondering if he was ever proud of me, and the other half trying not to care. The next morning, Gwen beat me to the barn. I found her in boots that didn't fit right, holding a feed scoop and already halfway through chores. "You didn't have to," I said, trying to take the bucket. She held firm. "You do everything alone, don't you?" "Not by choice, just kind of ended up that way." "Go lie down for once," she said. "Your spine won't snap from rest." I did, and I hated how much I needed it. When I headed back out, there was a thermos of black coffee waiting by the gate. No note, no fuss. That Friday, I went into the storage unit I'd inherited after the funeral and brought back one of the last crates. Big, square, heavy, top slats stamped with a faded MT. I put it in the barn next to the seed bags. Gwen spotted it before I even opened it. Old company stuff? She asked. Yeah, I said. From his downtown office. Hadn't gone through it yet. She stood quiet for a second, then pointed to a tucked corner. What's that? Safe, I said. Far as I can tell. Small one, locked. I don't know the combo. Could be full of paperweights for all I know. You ever think about trying to open it? I shrugged. Sure, just hadn't had the time. Truth was, something about that crate felt off. Not in a bad way. More like a song you've heard before but couldn't name. That night, Gwen made a pot of lentils with some carrots I hadn't realized were still good. She told Wesley he could draw on the back of a paper bag if he ran out of paper, and he lit up like she'd handed him gold. After dishes, she sat across from me and said, You ever think the people who walk out are just making room for the ones who actually want to stay? I didn't answer, but I looked at her a little longer than usual before I stood up to go shut the coop. The safe stayed unopened for the time being. I ran my hand over the dial once, like maybe touch would spark memory. It didn't. Just cold metal and more waiting. I wasn't ready to chase ghosts. I still had a kid to tuck in and livestock to count. But I made a mental note to try the numbers I knew. Birthdays, business dates, stuff Dad would have thought too obvious to write down. Gwen didn't push. She just noted where the crate sat and dusted around it like it belonged. Maybe it did. Maybe we all did, in our own busted-up sideways way. I sat at the kitchen table in my flannel shirt with grease on the sleeves, trying to understand what Nicole Watson had filed. The first page called it an emergency motion to preserve corporate continuity. That sounded like a mouthful of lawyer glue meant to stick me in a corner. I read it twice, then a third time slower. Still didn't feel clear. Gwen walked in, carrying a chipped mug and moving quiet like she always did when I was reading court papers. She set the tea down beside me, looked at the top line and said, Those words look mean. She wasn't wrong. What it meant, near as I could figure, was that Nicole wanted Peter to be named the temporary administrator of the estate, said it was for business stability, and also wanted to block any transfers of assets until the court made a full ruling. That included anything with the farm's name tied to Marshall's holdings. They were painting me like a wild card who might torch the family legacy if someone didn't bolt the door. I didn't need to be told where the language came from. Peter had always been good at telling other people I was the soft one, the one who needed fences and supervision. I folded the motion, slid it back into the envelope, and put my head in my hands. A couple days later, we had Wesley's next checkup. Another one. Dr. Vale came into the exam room with his usual notebook and fake calm. He asked a few tired questions, tapped his pen, then said, We should get a full cardiology panel just to be safe. Some markers might indicate long-term issues. What kind of issues? I asked. He didn't answer that directly, just nodded toward the chart like it explained everything. I watched him scribble another lab order, same signature loop as always. This makes visit number 12, I said out loud. Vale looked up for half a second. Yes, well, we're trying to be thorough. On the way home, my jaw was tight enough I could hear it click when I chewed gum. My gut kept whispering what I didn't want to believe. The appointments weren't for Wesley. They were for me, to keep me buried in tests, prescriptions, questions I couldn't afford, and time I didn't have. I carried the boy into the house after he fell asleep in the truck and laid him down with his stuffed beagle under one arm. Gwen was peeling potatoes at the sink. He order more? She asked without turning. Yeah, I said. Cardio consult, just to be safe. She didn't say anything. She just dropped a potato into the bowl with a splash and kept working. The next afternoon, a manila envelope showed up at the farm gate. No return address. It was wedged between two feed catalogs and sealed tight. The handwriting said, C. Thompson, Farm Office. Inside was a company memo, Thompson Holdings letterhead, about compliance procedures for consultant payments. The last line had a handwritten note in different ink. Check vendor ArcLight. No name, no signature, just a lead. I filed it in the drawer under utility bills and made a note to search later. That night, after Wesley went down and Gwen finished folding the week's laundry, I pulled out the farm laptop and typed the name. ArcLight. Nothing solid came up. Some vendor listing, a defunct LLC in Delaware, and a few search results that smelled like filler. Gwen walked past and saw the screen. "What's ArcLight?" "Not sure yet," I said. "Somebody wants me to look into it." She leaned down to read. "Looks like the kind of thing people hide money through." I nodded and closed the laptop. I wasn't ready to think through what that meant yet. Later that week, I brought the old crate from the barn into the workroom and set it on the bench. I'd noticed something odd about the slats before. One loose edge at the bottom, like someone had jammed a ledger in too hard and warped the wood. I took a flathead and gently pried at the seam until the bottom gave way. Under a thick envelope of business statements was a smaller section, hollowed out like a compartment. Inside, I found a worn jeweler's pouch, and next to it, a small brass key taped to a folded sheet of lined paper. The writing was sharp and angled. Dad's, no question. "If I'm not around, boys, read the letters first." I sat down hard on the workbench stool. My hands were suddenly dumb and slow. The pouch had a waxy smell, old velvet, and inside were 3 envelopes, each dated on a different June over 6 years, addressed to my sons. Nothing fancy, no legal header, just his handwriting, like he'd meant to get around to something and never did. I didn't open them right away. I knew if I read even one, the rest of the night would get away from me. I still had to check the stalls and get water to the goats before it froze over. I put the letters in my coat pocket and headed out to the barn. After Wesley was down and the dog fed, I sat on the back steps with a flashlight and read the first letter. Dad wrote about how he was always harder on Peter because he saw himself in him. He said he'd been softer with me, but not always better. He admitted to missing signs, times I'd pulled away and he hadn't chased me. He wrote that he wished he'd listened more and talked less, said everything he built was for both of us. There wasn't a single number or percentage, just sentences. Direct, almost stiff. But there was something in the phrasing, like maybe the man wasn't as cold as I thought, just unsure how to show it. The brass key didn't fit the crate safe. That surprised me. I stood in the barn thinking through what else it could go to. Then I remembered the old deposit box I'd taken home from the store before we closed it. It sat under the workbench, covered in sawdust. I tried the key. It fit. Inside were vendor receipts, 2 business cards, and a single index card with a number written longhand, 12/22/04. I knew that date. December 22nd, 2004. Dad's style. He never explained, just assumed you'd know what mattered. I went back to the crate, punched the numbers into the small safe dial. The latch gave on the second turn. Inside were more letters. A stack of handwritten notes about the original company values, partners, and one sentence underlined in red. If there's no will, split equal. Fair is simple. No legal terms. But he said it. He wrote it. I stood there holding the note while the barn cat rubbed my leg, and for the first time in weeks, my head went quiet. That line wouldn't win a case by itself, but it gave me something solid to carry. A compass, not a sword. I folded the papers, sealed the crate, and turned out the light. I didn't know anything was wrong until I walked into the kitchen after stacking hay bales and saw a note on the counter in Gwen's careful handwriting saying she'd be back by supper. The coffee pot was still hot, and the sink was half full of dishes, which was unlike her. I stood there a minute, staring at the note, trying to figure out if I'd missed a conversation. Headlights swept across the porch as a state-issued pickup eased up the drive. Gary Holt stepped out, lights off, the door creaking like it didn't want to open. I saw the badge clipped to his vest and felt the ground shift under me, heart kicking like it was ready to bolt. I thought of Wesley first. Always him. "Everything's all right," Gary said, holding his hands out calm. "No one's dead, but a young woman asked me to come find you. She's at Maple Ridge Clinic. Said you'd know what it meant." He paused. "She said she's got something you should hear." I don't remember grabbing my jacket, just that I was in the truck before he finished giving directions. I dropped Wesley off with Mrs. Duffy, 2 farms over. She'd known me since I showed up in a borrowed truck with $50 and a used shovel. She didn't ask questions when she opened the door, just looked at the boy, then at me. "Is this a long one?" she asked, brushing straw off her porch rug. "Could be. I'll be back before midnight unless the road's ice." She leaned down and hugged Wesley like he was hers. "Go handle it, Chase. I'll keep him warm and fed." I kissed the boy's head, thanked her twice, and peeled out down the gravel road before I lost my nerve. Maple Ridge Clinic looked smaller at night, all pale yellow lights and dusty linoleum. Gwen was in room 5, propped up on the exam table in a paper gown and socks too thin for the weather. Her ankle was wrapped, elbow bruised, but she was upright, breathing. Her face went soft when she saw me. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry." Again, until the words got small and dry in her throat. I pulled the chair close and sat down hard. "Tell me everything." And she did. She said she'd caught the afternoon commuter train to get away from the men who'd paid her. But when a couple of them trailed her car at the stop, she bailed at the next crossing. She twisted her ankle in the gravel and started walking the track bed. A state ranger, Gary Holt, picked her up there and drove her to Maple Ridge Clinic. Peter had hired her. That's where it started. He offered her money to observe me, said he wanted to know how I was positioning myself legally. She'd cleaned offices for the company before, done temp work. So when he dangled real cash and a clean place to sleep, she took it. She said she showed up with a recorder in her tote bag and questions rehearsed. Soft ones about lawyers, documents, the estate, whether I had plans to fight. She tried to plant them gently, afraid I'd catch on. "But then I saw you making waffles with a 6-year-old, she said. "And I saw your boots lined up by the door with his, and I couldn't do it anymore." She shut the recorder off for good after the first week, stopped asking questions and just started helping. Then she told me what she heard outside Peter's office door, the phrases I couldn't shake even after she stopped talking. "Keep him busy. He's fully occupied. Reports airtight. Paper trails are clean." My jaw locked so tight I could feel the tendons twitch. She reached into her tote and handed me the envelope with the check and the NDA. "They gave me this after," she said. "Call it hush money, travel stipend, whatever fits." I didn't sign anything. I didn't cash it. I wanted to give it to you. I unfolded the paper. The check was for $9,000. Clean, no memo line, drawn from some trust account. The NDA was 3 paragraphs of legal silence. "You can burn it, submit it, whatever you want. I'll testify. I'll sign whatever needs signing. I just want the mess to end." I looked at her, really looked. Pale from walking too far, hair damp with sweat and fear, hands tight around the edge of the table like she was bracing for me to yell. But I didn't. I'm a patient man. You have to be when you raise animals and small boys. But when someone puts their hands near my kid, I find a part of me that doesn't bend. "I believe you," I said, not because it's what I want to hear, because it fits, all of it. My gut's been warning me for weeks. She blinked, and her shoulders dropped like something finally let go. "I'm not mad," I added. "I've been lied to by worse, and you came back." She nodded once. "Can I still come home?" "If you're ready to fight," I said, "then yes." That was the only answer she needed. On the way back, I drove one-handed and called a new pediatric clinic in another town. I didn't care how far it was. I just wanted fresh eyes. When I told the nurse the name of our current doctor, her tone shifted. She squeezed Wesley into a cancellation slot for the following week. That told me everything I needed. When we pulled into the driveway, the windows were dark except for one lamp left on in the living room. Inside, Wesley was curled on the sofa with the dog wrapped around his feet like a guard. I picked him up, carried him to bed, and tucked the stuffed beagle under his chin. Then I stood there in the doorway, longer than I needed to. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad, Gwen across from me with her ankle up and a heating pad on low. "You still want eggs in the morning?" she asked. "If you're offering." She nodded and reached for the legal pad. We made a list. First, find a local attorney who didn't work in a glass tower or owe Peter a favor. Second, organize every paper we had. Letters from Dad, receipts, that memo about ArcLight. Third, find out what ArcLight actually was and who else had their fingers in it. Gwen said, "Do you think your brother actually knew what the doctor was doing?" "He asked how long they could keep me busy," I said. "He knew enough. I didn't want revenge. I didn't even want Peter's company. I just wanted equal, what was right. And I wanted my son safe. That's not too much to ask." The new pediatrician's name was Dr. Molly Hart. She wore glasses that slid down her nose and had a tone that didn't waste time. She asked Wesley a few questions, ran through his chart, and spent more time listening than talking. After the exam, she looked at me and said, "This kid doesn't need scans. He needs stability, structure, and a decent sleep schedule." "What about the markers?" I asked. She flipped a page. "Mild and not uncommon in growing kids. He needs a diet shift, cut wheat for now, and some basic physical therapy. Twice a week should do. But I'm not seeing anything here that calls for specialists or surgery." She didn't say Dr. Vale's name. She didn't have to. The file said enough. She offered to write a second opinion letter and said I could request full records be transferred if I planned to file a complaint. "I'm not sure what I'm filing yet," I told her. "But thank you." Wesley jumped off the exam table and ran to the little balance board in the corner of the room. He grinned when he stood on it without wobbling. "Can we build one of these at home?" he asked. "Sure can," I said, and meant it. We left with paperwork in hand and air in my lungs I hadn't felt in months. That afternoon, Gwen and I boxed everything. Dad's letters, the ArcLight memo, the NDA, the check, her notes, my appointment log, and a fresh copy of the second opinion, and drove to see a lawyer recommended by our feed store guy. Name was Harold Sutter. His office sat above a barber shop that still had a pole out front. Stairs creaked on the way up, and the whole place smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. Gwen said it reminded her of her granddad's tax guy. I said that made me like it more. Harold was in his 60s, tie too short, glasses on a cord. When I told him my brother's lawyer was Nicole Watson, he chuckled like that was the punchline to a joke he'd already heard. "She's good," he said, "but good don't mean right." He didn't bother with a welcome speech, just cleared a spot on his cluttered desk and waved us over. "Show me what you've got." We unpacked the folder. Gwen explained what she'd overheard. I added the doctor visits. I gave him the memo with ArcLight underlined and told him about the prepaid call from a stranger. Harold didn't flinch. He took the NDA, unfolded it, then held it up to the window. "Nice paper. Means they're serious." "Serious about shutting her up," I said. "Exactly," he replied, then pointed to my notebook. "You wrote all this down yourself?" "Every date, every test, every bill." He nodded. "Pattern's bad for them. But we need more than feelings. Courts like dots connected, not dots floating." That night, after we got back and Wesley was asleep, I went to the crate and pulled out Marshall's letters again. I hadn't touched them in a few days. I read the second one this time. Dated the summer I left home. He wrote, "You had a way of deciding things too fast, but I admired how you never doubled back once you made a choice." He talked about how Peter understood business and structure, but not people. Said he knew I'd never chase money the way Peter did, and that scared him. The third letter was shorter. "If I don't have the guts to write a will, split the rest equal. Don't let pride ruin what blood built." I read that line 3 times. Then I wrapped all 3 letters in butcher paper and packed them into a new envelope, labeled in block letters for Harold's eyes only. When I brought them into the office the next day, Harold flipped through them slowly, quiet the whole time. Then he said, "This ain't law, but it's moral weight. And judges notice when a man speaks clear, even if he doesn't file the right paperwork. Gwen called Gary Holt the day after, asked if he'd be willing to write down what happened at the train crossing. He didn't say much, just asked how detailed she wanted it. Then he mailed us a 2-page statement, handwritten in block letters, badge number at the bottom, signed clean, no drama, just the facts. That's what made it better. 2 days later, the farm line rang just past lunch. It was a number I didn't know, and I almost let it go, but something in my gut made me pick up. "Chase?" a voice asked, tight and shaky. "Who's this?" "Brendan. Brendan Cole. I sent you that envelope. I'm not supposed to call, but I figured you deserved more." He told me he'd worked in compliance at Thompson Holdings until about 6 months ago. Said ArcLight was a shell vendor used to route consulting payments, some legal, some not so clean. They called it external strategic medical input. But it was cover, he said. There's invoices that match up with Vail's visits and patient files. You won't find those on public records, but I can tell you what to look for. I didn't say much, just let him talk. Check the state's disclosure database, the one for continuing medical education and external speaking income. Vail listed ArcLight there. It's legal, but if he didn't tell you, that's a conflict. Then he hung up. No goodbye, just static. That night, Gwen and I dug through the State Medical Board's disclosure site. Buried in a PDF from the last year, we found Dr. Vail's filings. There it was, ArcLight Medical Consulting, listed under speaking fees and travel reimbursement. It wasn't illegal, not by itself, but the fact he'd never mentioned it, never disclosed that the same vendor writing checks to him was connected to my brother's company. It painted a picture, not fraud, but conflict, and one that made his aggressive care pattern start to stink. Harold agreed. He drafted a motion to compel documents from both Vail and Peter's company, also filed a notice of deposition for the doctor and a supplemental statement of potential interference. He asked Gwen to prepare a signed affidavit. We attached the check, the NDA, and her full account. Then Harold leaned back, folded his hands, and said, "Nicole's going to come hard. You ready for that?" "I'm not folding," I said. "I'm just holding my line." That weekend, I fixed a busted fence post on the back field. As I tamped the dirt down, I thought about Marshall. He didn't write a will because he believed we'd figure it out. Thought the name Thompson meant something unspoken but binding. He was wrong. But I didn't hate him for it. I decided I'd honor him the only way I knew how, by showing up, staying grounded, and letting the truth walk in on its own legs. Not with shouting, not with fists, just with facts. Court started at 9 sharp. Not 9:05, not just a few minutes. You could tell right away Judge Henderson didn't care for wasted time or noise. No robe rustling, no throat clearing. Just a knock of the gavel, a glance at the docket, and the words, "Let's proceed." The courtroom smelled like old paper and cold air. I wore clean jeans, a plain jacket, and boots I'd scrubbed the night before with vinegar and stubbornness. Gwen brushed a hand over my shoulder on the way in. Harold Sutter looked like himself, tie off center, eyes sharp. Nicole Watson came in with a folder full of aggression and a suit that looked like it could cut marble. Peter followed behind her with a look that said he already knew how this would end. The only question for him was how loud I'd lose. He took his seat without looking at me. Nicole opened for their side. Her voice was clean, fast, and practiced. She painted Peter as the natural steward of the company, said the business had been his since he was 16, called me a long-estranged sibling with no corporate ties and no relevant experience. She used the word destabilizing twice, said the emergency motion was not about exclusion, but about protection. I almost laughed. I didn't look at Peter. I watched the judge, who never once blinked too long. When Harold stood up, he didn't adjust his tie or clear his throat. He just nodded once and said, "Interstate law in this state is clear. 2 sons, no will, equal split." He paused long enough to let it land. Unless the other side can prove fraud or present a legal document, the law does not bend for preference or personality. He let that sit a beat longer, then shifted his tone. However, He added, "We are also presenting limited evidence of possible interference, acts taken by one party to delay or obstruct the other's access to resources and time." He requested to call Gwen Hale to the stand. Gwen stood slowly, ankle still wrapped, black dress simple. Her voice didn't wobble once. She told the court that she was hired by Peter to gather information. She admitted to spying. She didn't try to dodge it. "I accepted the job," she said, "but I stopped recording after the first week, because the man I was living with wasn't planning anything. He was just trying to raise a boy." She told them what she overheard outside Peter's office, the words, the tone, the look on Vale's face. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't break. When Nicole leaned in and asked if she'd fabricated any of it, Gwen calmly asked if she could read the bank check aloud. She held it up for the judge to see, then unfolded the NDA and said, "This was stapled to it. I didn't sign it. I brought it to him." That's when Judge Henderson leaned forward, just a few inches, just enough to show he was no longer reviewing notes. He was listening. Nicole called her a paid liar. Gwen didn't flinch. She just said, "I'll take an oath and repeat every word under penalty of perjury." That shut Nicole up faster than I expected. Harold called Gary next. Gary Holt walked in wearing a Green Ranger jacket over a white shirt, pants ironed like his mother raised him to be neat. He raised his hand, took the oath, and gave his statement like he was explaining a trail map. No flourish, just facts. She exited the train voluntarily when others became aggressive. She had no phone signal. I found her walking the track bed. She requested I find Chase Thompson. She refused medical care until I promised I'd tell him first. Her ankle was swollen, not broken. He didn't say a word more than he had to. That was the power of it. Harold thanked him and rested. Then it was Dr. Vale's turn. He walked in like he owned the floor, suit sharp, hair perfect. But under cross, it didn't take long to rattle him. Harold walked him through the visit history, the tests, the referrals, the second opinion. "You never recommended dietary changes." "No." "You never told the father that ArcLight was a paid vendor to Thompson Holdings." "I didn't think it was relevant." "You didn't disclose that you received payments listed under ArcLight Medical Consulting while treating this patient?" "I disclosed them to the board. That's standard." "To the patient?" "No, not directly." "Why not?" Vale shifted. "It's common practice to separate administrative and medical disclosures." Harold showed him the filing from the board. "You admit these payments existed?" "Yes." "Were any of them linked to recommendations made to this family?" "I can't say specifically." Then the second opinion letter was introduced. Judge Henderson held up one hand. "I have 2 questions. First, did you disclose to the patient or guardian that you had a paid relationship with an entity connected to the family's corporate holdings?" Vale cleared his throat. "Not in explicit terms." "Second," the judge said, "do you stand by the necessity of every scan, referral, and test ordered in this case?" Vale opened his mouth, then closed it. They were cautious. "That's not what I asked." After a pause, he said, "No, not all of them." The room went still. The judge called a recess. 15 minutes. When he came back, his tone didn't change. Still even, still firm. "This court recognizes the standard application of interstate law and the absence of any valid will. Therefore, the estate will be divided equally between Mr. Chase Thompson and Mr. Peter Thompson." Nicole didn't move. Peter stared straight ahead like the decision hadn't happened. The judge continued. "This court further finds that, while no fraud has been formally proven, there is sufficient concern to warrant referral of Dr. Lennox Vale to the State Medical Board for review of practices related to outside compensation and patient treatment recommendations." He turned to Nicole. "The request to install Mr. Peter Thompson as sole administrator is denied." Then he tapped his gavel. "We're adjourned." Peter looked stunned, not shouting, not smug, just like a man watching a window close on a deal he thought was already signed. Nicole packed her briefcase like someone who'd been through worse and would go through worse again. She didn't speak to me. She didn't look at Gwen. Harold shook my hand by the rail and said, "You did it right. Now go home. You've got chores." Out on the courthouse steps, a reporter shoved a recorder in my face. "Do you have a comment?" "We're grateful the court followed the law," I said. That was it. We got in the truck, and I drove us past the bare fields and shut off farm stands. For the first time in months, I started thinking about spring. The first whisper came 2 days after the ruling. Peter's operations team missed a supplier payment. The Midwest chain that stocked his high-end watches canceled their spring reorder. Brendan sent word through Harold that the warehouse manager quit after being shoved through 3 different meetings with no direction and plenty of blame. Then came the board minutes, leaked through standard disclosures. Peter had granted himself a discretionary retention bonus 3 weeks before the hearing. $9,000, same amount as the check they handed Gwen. Nicole's voice came back to me. That phrase on repeat, "within policy." Maybe it was, but policy isn't the same as clean. Peter tried to plug holes with money. He cut the new sales trainee program to preserve margin. Short-term thinking. It bought him a month of room to maneuver and quarter of resentment. By early spring, his senior team started shopping around. I never asked Brendan for updates. They came anyway. I didn't gloat. I don't have that muscle. I fed the calves. I laid drip line across the new row beds. I rotated compost and let my hands do the thinking. Wesley's second opinion treatment held strong. He got excited about his strong steps chart, marked his stretches with stickers, and reminded me every morning to bend with him before chores. The kid moved like he believed he could trust his body again. That was all I needed to see. One quiet Sunday, we pulled Marshall's letters from the safe and read them around the kitchen table. Just me, Gwen, and Wesley. Gwen read slow, voice soft, until the words got caught in her throat. She wiped her face with the back of her hand like my Aunt Beth used to when she didn't want anyone to make a big deal about tears. Wesley didn't ask questions. He just held the last page like it was a map. We put the letters in the new fireproof safe and locked it. I didn't label the folder. Some things you just remember. I married Gwen in May under the big maple by the old well. 37 neighbors came, most of them bringing pie or folding chairs. My cousin brought a guitar and played until dusk. We didn't write fancy vows, just promised what we'd already been doing, showing up, holding steady, keeping it honest. Wesley walked across the grass with a crown of dandelions and tucked them into Gwen's hair without asking. Halfway through the cake, he called her Mom, like it had always been true. Nobody corrected him. Nobody needed to. Tiffany came back in July. She pulled into the drive in a rental car too clean for farm dust and stepped out in a city dress that didn't belong on gravel. She said she missed the air out here. She said the city wasn't what she thought. Said she missed us. She tried to walk past me like she used to. I put one hand on the doorframe and didn't move. "You can't just step back into a chapter you walked out of," I said. "I just want to talk to him," she said. I nodded once and called for Wesley. He came in from the yard, hands dirty, face sun-warmed. He looked at her, then at me. She said, "Wes, it's Mama." He shook his head. "My mom is Gwen," he said, voice quiet but clear. Then he walked to the sink to wash his hands for supper. Tiffany stood on the stoop a minute longer, long enough for the bugs to find her legs. Then she got back in the car and drove off without slamming the door. She tried again with texts, screenshots, long messages that twisted guilt into questions. I didn't answer. I'd learned by then that silence can build a fence taller than any law. I took a small portion of my half of the estate and set up a county-level fund for kids' therapy. No plaque, no press, just a check and a handshake. I asked Gary Holt to point me to folks who'd know where it was most needed. He gave me 3 names. I split the amount and hand-delivered the envelopes. That's how I like it. Direct and done. Nicole tried to claw something back with a motion claiming irreparable business harm. Judge Henderson denied it without hearing. The state medical board opened an official review of Dr. Vale's conduct. The man went on leave to focus on family. That's lawyer speak for wait until this dies down. I didn't toast, I didn't clap, but I started sleeping deeper. By harvest, we joined the local produce co-op, got our late summer tomatoes and squash into 2 grocers down in Trumbull County. Gwen handled invoices like she'd done it all her life. She had a binder system and a look that made delivery drivers show up on time. Wesley painted a sign for our roadside stand with crooked letters and a bright yellow sun. Cyclists started pulling over just to take pictures. Sometimes they bought honey, sometimes just a few cucumbers. It didn't matter. It felt like a house again. We didn't win everything, but we kept what mattered. That's enough. Peter showed up the following November, just before the frost set in deep. He pulled up in a dusty silver sedan. No driver, no jacket, not even a briefcase. Just him, standing there with tired eyes and both hands resting on the top rail of my gate like it was holding him up. He didn't honk or yell. He just stood still, giving me time to wave him off if I wanted to. I didn't. I pushed the gate open slow and nodded toward the chair by the shed. He walked in without a word and sat. The wind had teeth that day. He didn't button his shirt, didn't shiver, just leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at the ground like it might talk back. I was wrong, he said. All of it. I hurt you. And that boy who didn't do a single thing except feed chickens and draw tractors. His voice caught, but he kept going. I don't know if the company's gonna make it. It might. But I'm scared, Chase. Scared like I was when I was 12 and Dad drove off without saying where he was headed. I didn't offer him coffee. I didn't throw him a rope either. I let him sit in the quiet while the dog snored by the woodpile and a crow called out across the field. Gwen stepped out on the porch just long enough to wave. Then she went back inside. She knows a man's got to say things on his own sometimes. He finally looked up. Do you think we could ever get back to being something like brothers? I thought about lying. I didn't. Yeah, I said, but not like before. Forgiveness and trust aren't twins. One's a gift. The other's earned. He nodded slow, like that sentence had weight. I get it, he said. You're right. I leaned back against the shed wall and crossed my arms. There's one condition if you want to come to birthdays and sit at my table again, I told him. That retention bonus you pulled during the whole mess, the $9,000 Nicole kept calling within policy, I want it back out in the world. He didn't argue. Where? I said. County fund, kids therapy, travel help for families who can't afford to see a good doctor. I don't want your name on it. I want cashier's checks and receipts. No PR stunt, just balance. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and sighed through his teeth. Then he nodded. I'll do it, he said. I should have done it before. He shifted in the chair and looked past me at the fence line. I'll talk to Brendan too. Try to fix what I can. No more consultants with shiny names either. No more ArcLight. Hearing him say it out loud hit different, like someone pulling weeds by hand after years of pretending they weren't there. We walked the fence line once before he left. He asked about the rye cover crop, why it stayed green even with frost coming. I told him about soil hold and root depth. He didn't talk. He just listened. That's something. Before he got in the car, Wesley came out from the side yard in his work boots and a jacket 2 sizes too big. Peter knelt and held out his hand. I'm proud of you, he said, for doing your exercises, for taking care of your family. Wesley shook his hand with a farmer's grip, then ran off to feed the dog without looking back. That's how kids do it. They move forward before you know they're watching. That night, I sat on the porch with Gwen, our hands wrapped around mugs that had seen years of winters. The frost crept across the pasture slow and steady like a curtain being drawn. I'm not a preacher, so I won't dress it up. We were okay. Not perfect, but solid. And the gate was still standing, because I didn't back down when it mattered. Before you head out, let me put one honest question in your ear. If someone in your life crossed the line the way Peter did, would you take them back with conditions or shut the gate for good? If you've got hype turned on, Tap it now to help this story reach more people. And don't forget to subscribe and hit like. It's just one click and it matters. Drop a quick comment too, even a simple good story, and tell me where you stand.
YouTube picked this for you. Tap it. Let's see if they guessed right.